The day my family found out I had inherited $50 million was the same day they suddenly remembered I existed. The same people who spent years laughing at my thrift store clothes, making jokes about my tiny apartment, and treating me like I was some embarrassing mistake were now calling me non-stop. My phone rang so many times that I eventually had to turn it off. The worst part. Just a week earlier, those same relatives had publicly humiliated me at a family gathering and told me I would never amount to anything. I still remember standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone as message after message poured in. My aunt was calling me her favorite niece. My cousins wanted to reconnect. My brother, who hadn't spoken to me in almost 2 years, suddenly wanted to have lunch. It was honestly unbelievable. And that's why I'm here asking you all this question. Was I wrong for refusing to help any of them after everything they put me through? Tell me honestly, because even now, part of me wonders if I went too far. For most of my life, I was the poor one in the family. My name is Emily, and growing up, I learned very early that my relatives measured people's worth by the size of their bank account. My parents worked hard, but we never had much money. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked long hours as a receptionist. They were good people, but money was always tight. Meanwhile, my mother's side of the family seemed obsessed with showing off their wealth. Every holiday gathering felt like a competition. My uncles drove luxury cars. My cousins wore designer clothes. They constantly talked about investments, vacations, and expensive purchases. Whenever my parents couldn't afford something, the rest of the family would make subtle comments disguised as jokes. As a child, I didn't fully understand what was happening. I just knew that family gatherings always made me feel small. My cousins would compare their newest phones while I sat quietly with an older model. They talked about ski trips and cruises while my family struggled to pay utility bills. Every conversation seemed designed to remind us that we didn't belong. Things became even worse after my father passed away when I was 21. Losing him shattered our family emotionally and financially. Medical bills had drained what little savings we had. My mother and I suddenly found ourselves fighting just to keep our heads above water. During that difficult period, I learned exactly who my relatives really were. At my father's funeral, several family members barely acknowledged us. Some offered polite condolences, but many seemed more interested in discussing business deals and vacation plans than supporting a grieving family. One of my uncles actually complained about the traffic on the way to the service. I wish I could say things improved after that, but they didn't. I worked 2 jobs while finishing college. During the day, I attended classes. At night, I waited tables. I often slept only 4 or 5 hours. While my cousins posted pictures from beach resorts, I worried about paying rent. Whenever family gatherings happened, the comments never stopped. "Emily, you're still working there. Don't you think you should find a real career? Maybe if you'd made smarter choices." The implication was always the same. According to them, my financial struggles were somehow my fault. The person who enjoyed humiliating me the most was my cousin Jessica. She was only 2 years older than me, but she acted like she was superior in every possible way. Jessica came from money, married money, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about it. At one Thanksgiving dinner, she laughed when she saw my dress. "Oh wow, Emily, vintage is really making a comeback, huh?" The entire table laughed. I knew she was making fun of me for wearing a second-hand dress. I laughed awkwardly because I didn't want to cause a scene, but inside I was humiliated. Moments like that happened constantly. The final straw came during my grandmother's 85th birthday celebration. Nearly the entire family attended. The event was held at an expensive country club that I honestly couldn't afford. I spent weeks saving money just to buy a suitable outfit and contribute to the gift fund. At one point during dinner, the conversation turned toward careers and financial success. Jessica started talking about real estate investments. Another cousin discussed stock portfolios. Then someone asked me how work was going. Before I could answer, Jessica smirked. "Emily's still struggling, right?" A few people chuckled. Then she added, "At least somebody in the family keeps us humble." Everyone laughed. Everyone, including people I had spent years trying to earn respect from. I felt my face burning. My hands were shaking underneath the table. That night I went home and cried. Not because of the joke itself, but because I finally realized they would never see me as an equal. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how kind I was, no matter how much I achieved. To them, I would always be the poor relative. What none of them knew was that my life was about to change in a way none of us could have imagined. About a week later, I received a phone call from a law office. At first, I assumed it was some kind of scam. The attorney explained that a distant relative had passed away and that I was named in their estate documents. I barely recognized the name. I had met this relative only a handful of times as a child. I almost hung up. Then the attorney mentioned a number that made me sit down immediately. $50 million. At first, I thought I had misunderstood him. I asked him to repeat it. He did. $50 million. I sat there in complete silence. My entire world had just changed. And here's where I want your opinion. Imagine spending your entire life being mocked, judged, and humiliated by the people who were supposed to support you. Then suddenly, you have the power to change all of their lives, or ignore them completely. What would you do? Because that's exactly the situation I found myself in. Before I tell you what happened next, pause for a moment and think about it. Would you forgive them? Would you help them? Or would you remember every cruel word they ever said? What happened after they discovered my inheritance was something none of us will ever forget. For the first few days after learning about the inheritance, I told almost nobody. The attorney advised me to stay quiet until all the paperwork was finalized, and honestly, that wasn't difficult. I was still trying to process it myself. Every morning I woke up convinced it had been a dream. I would stare at the ceiling and remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. $50 million. The number didn't even feel real. I continued going to work. I continued living in my small apartment. I continued driving my old car that rattled every time I accelerated. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The inheritance came from my great-aunt Elena, a woman most of my family barely talked about. She had never married and had built an incredibly successful business over several decades. While many relatives only contacted her when they wanted something, she apparently paid close attention to how people treated others. According to the attorney, she had been observing family dynamics for years. That information alone made me emotional. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen how I was treated. Someone had cared. When the legal process was completed, the money officially became mine. I paid off every debt my mother and I had. Every loans. Every credit card. Every medical bill. The relief on my mother's face when I told her was something I'll never forget. She cried for almost an hour. Not because of the money itself. Because for the first time in years she wasn't afraid. She wasn't wondering how we'd pay the next bill. She wasn't calculating expenses before buying groceries. She could finally breathe. That alone made every difficult year worth it. For about 2 weeks the secret remained hidden. Then everything exploded. One of my relatives somehow learned about the inheritance through a mutual connection connected to the attorney's office. Within 24 hours, the news spread through the entire family. Suddenly, my phone became a battlefield. The first call came from Jessica. The same Jessica who had spent years humiliating me. I stared at her name on my screen for nearly a minute before answering. "Emily," she said with unnatural excitement. "Oh my God, I've been trying to reach you." I almost laughed. 2 weeks earlier, she couldn't be bothered to reply to my messages. Now she sounded like my best friend. "Hi, Jessica. We should get lunch, it's been forever." Forever. As if she hadn't spent years treating me like garbage. I told her I'd think about it. The next call came from Uncle Richard. Then Aunt Melissa. Then cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Then distant relatives whose birthdays I couldn't even remember. Every conversation followed the same pattern. They pretended to care about me. They asked how I was doing. Then eventually the discussion drifted toward money. Some people were subtle. Others weren't. One cousin outright asked if I planned to share the blessing. Another relative suggested investing in a business opportunity, that conveniently required several $1 million. The most shocking request came from an uncle who once told me I was wasting my life. He called asking for a small loan. The loan was $2 million. I wish I were kidding. What amazed me wasn't the greed. It was the entitlement. They genuinely believed they deserved access to money they had done nothing to earn. My mother warned me to be careful. "Now you'll see who people really are," she said. She was right. A month later, Jessica invited me to dinner. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me wanted answers. Part of me wanted closure. And part of me wanted to see if she was capable of being honest. The restaurant she chose was extremely expensive. Ironically, it was one of the same places she used to brag about visiting while I could barely afford groceries. When I arrived, she immediately hugged me. The hug felt fake. Everything about the evening felt fake. For 30 minutes she talked about family memories, old stories, and how close we supposedly were. Then she finally got to the point. "My husband and I are considering buying a vacation property." I nearly rolled my eyes. There it was. The real reason for the dinner. She continued talking about investment opportunities and financial growth, before finally asking whether I'd be interested in helping. Helping. Such a nice word for giving someone millions of dollars. I calmly asked why she thought I should. She looked genuinely confused. "Because we're family." That sentence almost made me laugh out loud. Family. Interesting. Where was that family when I couldn't afford rent? Where was that family when my father died? Where was that family when I sat through years of humiliation? Apparently family only mattered when money was involved. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I simply said no. The expression on her face changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. The smile faded. For a brief second, I saw the real Jessica again. The same Jessica who had mocked me for years. The rest of dinner was awkward. A few days later, I learned she had started telling relatives I was selfish. That became the family narrative. Apparently, I was greedy. Apparently, I had changed. Apparently, money had made me arrogant. The irony was unbelievable. The people who spent years looking down on me were now criticizing me for not funding their lifestyles. As the months passed, the pressure intensified. Some relatives tried guilt. Some tried manipulation. Some tried emotional blackmail. One aunt actually cried on the phone while explaining why her children deserved a better future. I asked where this concern had been when my mother and I were struggling. She didn't have an answer. Then came the family reunion. The reunion would eventually become the moment everything changed. Nearly everyone attended. For the first time in my life, I arrived without feeling intimidated. Not because I had money. Because I finally understood my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's opinion. The atmosphere was strange. People who previously ignored me now rushed to greet me. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Everyone seemed overly polite. Artificially polite. It felt like being surrounded by actors performing a bad play. Halfway through the evening, Uncle Richard proposed a toast. He stood up holding a glass. He talked about family. About unity. About supporting each other. Then he started hinting that successful family members should help less fortunate relatives. I immediately knew where this was going. Everyone knew. The room became quiet. Several people looked directly at me. It was obvious. This entire speech was aimed at me. For years I had remained silent during their insults. Not this time. I stood up. My hands weren't shaking. My voice was calm. I looked around the room and said something I had wanted to say for years. I find it interesting that everyone's talking about family now. Nobody spoke. I spent years struggling, years being mocked, years being treated like I didn't matter. The room became painfully silent. I continued. When my father died, most of you disappeared. A few relatives lowered their eyes. When I worked 2 jobs, nobody offered help. More silence. When I was humiliated at family gatherings, nobody defended me. At this point, several people looked uncomfortable. Good. I had been uncomfortable for years. Then I looked directly at Jessica. Some of the people asking for support are the same people who laughed at me for being poor. Her face turned bright red. Nobody interrupted. Nobody denied it. Because they couldn't. They knew it was true. I took a deep breath. Then I delivered the line that changed everything. You had years to treat me like family, you chose not to. The silence that followed felt endless. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone. I simply told the truth. And somehow the truth hurt more than any revenge ever could. After that night, something interesting happened. The requests slowed down. Not completely, but significantly. Many relatives realized they couldn't guilt me anymore. Others became angry and cut contact. Honestly, that was fine. The people who left were never interested in me anyway. They were interested in my bank account. Meanwhile, I focused on building the life I actually wanted. I purchased a comfortable home for my mother and me. Not a mansion. Just a beautiful place where we felt safe. I started charitable programs in my father's memory. I funded scholarships for students struggling financially. I donated to organizations that helped families facing medical debt. In other words, I used the money to help people who truly needed it. People who reminded me of who I used to be. A year later, I attended another family gathering. The atmosphere was completely different. Not because people respected my money. Because they finally understood they couldn't control me. Some relatives were polite. Some avoided me. Some remained bitter. But none of them could make me feel small anymore. That power was gone forever. The funniest part. The revenge everyone expected never happened. I didn't buy their houses and evict them. I didn't publicly humiliate them. I didn't destroy their lives. Instead, I did something much worse. I succeeded. I became happy. I moved on. And nothing frustrates toxic people more than realizing they no longer have power over you. Looking back now, I don't think inheriting $50 million was the greatest gift I received. The greatest gift was clarity. The money revealed everyone's true character. It showed me who genuinely cared and who only cared about what I could provide. That lesson was priceless. So if there's a moral to this story, it's this: never measure your worth through the opinions of people who only value money. The same people who mock you today may be the ones asking for your help tomorrow. Stay focused, keep moving forward, and never let anyone convince you that your value depends on your bank account. If you were on my side, make sure to like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was I right to refuse them, or should I have helped anyway? Let me know below. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.